Have you ever prayed feeling like you were talking to yourself? You're not alone. Many Christians experience this at different points in their lives. You might feel this way because you think God would never use someone like you. Maybe you reflect on your past and wonder how God could use someone with your history. But the truth is, friend, that feeling is mistaken. Let me tell you something. God regularly uses ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. He can and does work through people from all walks of life. So when that voice in your head tells you God would never use you, don't listen. God chooses whoever He wants. Consider Elijah's life to see how God employs an ordinary person for extraordinary purposes. As you read about Bible characters, you might view them as special and unique, almost like they have superhero powers. Indeed, they are heroes of the faith. But in reality, they are far from extraordinary. James discusses Elijah in the following passage. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain. For 3 years and 6 months, it did not rain on the earth. Then he prayed again, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. James 5:17-18. Elijah had the same nature as you and I. He was not superhuman, yet his prayers did extraordinary things. At the time of Elijah, there was a king by the name of Ahab. He led the people of Israel into idol worship. Instead of offering sacrifice assist to the Lord alone, they were offering sacrifices to gods that were not real. As a punishment, Elijah prayed, and his prayers led to a drought. This drought was judgment from God on Ahab and the people of Israel. God used Elijah in such a mighty way. But the Bible very clearly tells us that Elijah was just like you and me. The Bible tells us that Elijah was bold enough, courageous enough to go up against hundreds of prophets on Mount Carmel. But get this, Elijah was also human enough to flee from one woman named Jezebel. Think about that closely. Elijah challenged hundreds of prophets to a battle to see if God would hear them. He had the confidence to stand there for hours as the prophets of Baal called out to their false god. Their false god would not like the animal they were sacrificing. Yet in a single moment, Elijah prayed. And as soon as he did, God sent fire to light up Elijah's sacrifice. This was a man who truly walked with God and had a real relationship with the Almighty. But Elijah was afraid of Ahab's wife, Jezebel. He was so afraid, in fact, that he ran and hid in the desert. Elijah's humanity did not stop at him hiding from Jezebel in the desert. He also asked God to take his life. In the midst of his despair, Elijah felt unworthy and overwhelmed. Just like any of us, he experienced moments of weakness and doubt. It's important to remember that even though Elijah was used by God in mighty ways, he still had moments when he felt like he couldn't go on. This should give us hope and encouragement that we too can be used by God despite our own imperfections and moments of weakness. While Elijah was in the desert, God did not abandon him. Instead, God met him there and provided for his needs. He sent an angel to give Elijah food and water, strengthening him for the journey ahead. This incredible act of divine care shows us that God understands our humanity and is always ready to provide for our needs, even when we feel like we are at our lowest point. As Elijah continued his journey, God led him to Mount Horeb, where he would have a life-changing encounter. On the mountain, God revealed himself to Elijah not in a powerful wind, earthquake, or fire, but in a gentle whisper. This experience demonstrated that God's presence is not always found in the spectacular, but can be experienced in the quiet moments of our lives. This revelation deepened Elijah's relationship with God and empowered him to continue his mission with renewed purpose. Following this encounter, God instructed Elijah to anoint new leaders and appoint his successor, Elisha. In doing so, Elijah would no longer feel alone in his mission, as he would be surrounded by others who shared his faith and dedication to serving God. This support system would enable Elijah to face future challenges with greater confidence, knowing that he was not alone in his fight against idolatry and the forces of evil. 1 Kings 19 verse 4 says this, "But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, 'It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers.'" Now, for a moment, I want you to think about this. The same man who called fire from heaven is now asking God to take his own life. You could almost say Elijah was in a severe state of depression here. Elijah was certainly an emotional man, a man who went through the highs and lows of life. But the beauty of his story is that he walked with the Lord. He was still used by God, despite being brave at one point and afraid in another. He was bold here, but scared there, strong in faith some days, but also had days where he was down and depressed. Now, let me tell you, if God can use Elijah, he can use anyone, which includes using you. God does not use those with the most power, influence, or money. He uses those who are willing to follow him. He uses those with a willing heart. When Elijah was at his lowest point, God did not give up on him or turn away. Instead, he reached out to Elijah with understanding and compassion, reminding him that he was not alone. He reassured Elijah that there were still thousands of people in Israel who had not bowed down to Baal, and that his efforts had not been in vain. God's love and support for Elijah in his darkest hour is a reminder that he will never abandon us, no matter how weak or unworthy we may feel. Even when Elijah felt like he couldn't go on, God continued to work through him. He guided Elijah back to his calling and gave him a renewed sense of purpose. In the same way, God can use our own moments of weakness and vulnerability to deepen our relationship with him and to strengthen our faith. We don't have to be perfect for God to use us. We just need to be willing to trust and follow him. As we reflect on Elijah's story, we are reminded that God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called. Underline the word, he qualifies the called. We may not feel equipped or capable to serve God, but he is more than able to work through our weaknesses and use them for his glory. It's not about what we can do on our own, but about what God can do through us when we surrender our lives to him. Let Elijah's story inspire us to be open to God's call on our lives. Even when we feel ill-equipped or unworthy, I want you to remember that it is in our weakness that God's strength can be most powerfully displayed. If we are willing to trust and follow him, we can be confident that God will use us in ways we never imagined for his glory and the advancement of his kingdom. Psalm 8 verse 2 says, "Out of the mouth of babies and infants, you have established strength because of your foes to still the enemy and the avenger." Newborn babies do not have the power to talk. If they are hurt, they cannot tell their parents. They do not have the ability to go turn on the air conditioning. All they can do is cry. Now think that the Bible tells us that out of the mouth of babes, God defeats his enemies. God does this to show how great he is. Your power comes not from you being great, but from your God being great. So what is stopping you from doing great things for the kingdom of God? I promise that it is not your ability. God can use the least skilled of us to make a monumental impact for His kingdom. I promise that it is not your status. God can use a slave to change a nation. I promise it is not your wealth. God can use a poor man to shake up the world. It may be your willingness to step out in faith that causes you to change the world. God qualifies the unqualified. Consider the story of a young shepherd boy, unassuming and inexperienced in the ways of the world. This boy spent his days tending his father's flock, keeping them safe from harm and singing songs of praise to the Lord. His name was David, the mighty David, and he was the youngest of his brothers, the least likely to be chosen for anything significant. But God had a plan for him, a plan that would defy human expectations. When the nation of Israel faced a great threat in the form of a giant named Goliath, David was not the obvious choice to confront him. In fact, no one would have expected him to step forward. Yet, it was David's faith and trust in the Lord that shifted him to that dimension. He believed that God would deliver him from Goliath's hand, just as he had delivered him from the paws of lions and bears while tending his flock. Armed with nothing more than a simple sling and a few stones, listen, David approached this fearsome Goliath. The giant mocked and ridiculed him. Unbelievable. But David remained unshaken in his faith. He declared that it was not by his own strength that he would defeat Goliath, but by the power of the Lord. And with a single stone, David struck Goliath down, showing the world that God can use the most unlikely of individuals to bring about his victory. This remarkable story demonstrates that God is not limited by our perceived weaknesses, skills, or status. He can take the most unassuming person and use them to accomplish great things. Just as he used David, the young shepherd boy, to defeat a mighty giant and save a nation, he can use anyone who is willing to step out in faith and trust in his power. It's not about our abilities or resources. It's about our willingness to let God work through us, even when we feel inadequate or unprepared. God can use anybody to do His work. He uses broken sinners with human nature. If He can use them, He can certainly use you. It's not about what you can do, but what you can do, but what Jesus has already done for you. He has defeated death and sin on your behalf. He has overcome darkness for you. If He can do that, He can certainly use you to bring light and love to a broken world. Pray for extraordinary things and see what your God will do. We don't have to be perfect or possess remarkable abilities. All we need is a willing heart and a genuine desire to follow His lead. As we step out in faith, seeking to do God's work, we may encounter obstacles and challenges along the way. By leaning on His wisdom and trusting in His promises, we can overcome any difficulty and emerge stronger in our faith and more effective in our service to Him.